Hi, nerds. I bought another comic book collection. So 16 short boxes, what I would consider a small to medium sized comic book collection. And I want to tell you about it. But I'm only going to show you two comic books, which is a little weird. So most of the time, we're going to be talking about negotiation, how I go about sort of thing, because there's all sorts of different thoughts and opinions on that. I'll just share mine. So let's start with these two comics. Here were the two keys I pulled out of the collection. And obviously these are great comics. This is the first appearance of X-23, now known as full Wolverine, Laura, the daughter of Wolverine, the clone. The comics are confusing and weird, but this is the first appearance of X-23, so this is a nice modern comic. And here is quite possibly the maybe the second largest Bronze Age key. This is a great comic. This is the first appearance of Punisher. It's in pretty solid condition, and so these were the two comics essentially we were talking about in this box of 16 short boxes. And so here's what happens when you buy a collection. You're looking for the keys, right? These are the key comics, first appearance, big character death. That's what we mean by key. And so you're looking for those because those are the ones of value, and people think comics are valuable, but a few comics are valuable. A few key comics are valuable, and the rest are worth about a nickel. So they're just comics, fillers, dollar bin, whatever terminology you'll use. They aren't valuable by a lot of means. You can lot them up as runs and be like, hey, I'm going to sell you, issue 1 through 10 of whatever. But the story is they're mainly a burden to store. I like them. I like to pad out my collection, so I went through these 16 boxes that are here in front of me. In addition to these two keys, which I love, I found some comics that kind of filled in gaps in my collection or whatever. But the rest are filler. And so when you're going through a collection, here's what I like to do. I like to take the good old-fashioned Overstreet. Now, I know a lot of folks are like, ooh, that's a book printed on paper. That's crazy. I'm using my fancy app. And I love Cover Price. So I use Cover Price to do the value of comics and also to sort my collection. But the great thing about Overstreet is it's solid. It's an agreed upon price to get the FMV, which stands for fair market value. So what I like to do when I'm talking to someone buying a collection, and as a quick aside, this was the nicest guy. The great thing about meeting folks to buy collections is you just meet nice folks and you chat and you're like, hey, what do you collect? You collect when you was a kid? I collected when I was a kid. And so it's just kind of fun to meet. And so we and I were chatting. But when I do that, I like to say, okay, let's talk about your tentpole books, your 2-3 books that are the highlights of your collection, and I want to pay you FMV, fair market value, for those books. Because if you're selling your collection, and it means a lot to you. Comics are emotional, you have nostalgia, all those things. You want to feel like you're getting something fair for your favorite books. And so that's the reason I like to pay fair market value for the 2 to 3 biggest books in the collection. This happened to be these two, so you go to Overstreet. Otherwise, it's hard to get expectations synced up, right? Because a lot of folks look at eBay listings, which is horrible to figure out the value, because everyone knows you go to eBay sold. You have to be like, what actually sold? Because somebody will list something for $2,000 more than it's other people would buy it for, just hoping they get lucky and Nick Cage purchases it, right? So you got to go by eBay solds. That's a little tricky. You could pull out your app and do, but sometimes that's like the fluctuations. It's like cryptocurrency. It's like no one has confidence or trust in that. Folks, trust Overstreet if you want to get something that's just okay. We can all agree. Then it comes down to condition. The great thing about Overstreet is it's like 2.0, 4.0, 6, right? So it gives you these big ranges. You don't have to get exact. but you have to get some agreed upon, well, here's a condition. Sometimes that doesn't always work. I was talking to this guy that had some great Spider-Man comics. He was convinced they were all 8.0s, and these comics were 2.0s at best. And I was like, okay, listen, man, I'll be generous and say a 3.0 on this, but these are really beat up. He's like, and he would always say, I think they're a little better than that. I think they're a little better than that. He thought they were 8.0s, all of them. And so my point of sharing that is sometimes you just have folks with just unrealistic expectations, and even something like Overstreet can't get you on the same page, despite trying to work it through, and you just have to be patient with some folks. But most of the time at Overstreet, you can get a general understanding. You look at this and you're like, oh, okay, I think it's about this range, right? And then it gives you the FMV, the fair market value, and agreed upon, and be like, that's what I'll pay you. And then once that's agreed upon, it's like, okay, for the rest of these comics, can I get a really nice deal on this filler stuff? And at that point, folks typically feel good because they feel like they're getting a fair price for their books that mean a lot to them. They understand that most comics aren't worth a ton, and they can get. Now that's the way I do it. A lot of folks, they'll pull out the keys and then they'll just like tally up something and try to throw out a number. I know there's this one guy on YouTube, and it's 17 cents a comic, and he just, like a dog on a bone, goes through, and it's like, no matter what keys are in there, he's like, I only pay 17 cents a comic, bottom line. And that's just not my way. I want people to feel like they're getting a fair price for their favorite comics, and then for the rest, it's like, can you give me a really great deal on the rest of the filler? And that typically works out fantastically for everyone involved. Folks are happy, and we go on our ways. And then I go through these boxes that are, what we call filler, and I'm like, oh, I got some. There are some that I can fill out my collection with. Or, you always have a $10, $15 book that's, that isn't a big key, but it's, it's a pretty good book. And so what I can do is I can put them in the pink elephant, which is where my antique booth is, and I can have a box of, $8 comics or whatever. And over time, slowly, they'll sell. And then I can break even on paying FMV for those big bucks. Or, sometimes you get lucky and you find something that's like, oh, that's a $25 book. I don't put anything under $10 on eBay because it's just, there's so many fees and the shipping, and it's just a pain, right? And so that's what I do. I wanted to explain a little bit about buying collections. So this was a collection of 16 short boxes. It had 2 major keys. I paid what was a FMV, a fair market value based on Overstreet, and not some speculators, eBay listing nonsense. But that meant everyone was happy. Everyone felt good about it. I had a nice connection with a fellow collector that was, he just wanted to get him out of his garage, and it was time to part with him. I wanted to give him a new home. I'm stoked. I have some other comics to fill out my collection. I have 2 great keys, and then I might be able over time to slowly make my money back by, lotting up and selling the filler. So that's how I go about selling the collection. Just thought I would share that. There are tons of different ways that folks approach it. This is the way I approach it.